Awesome. And we are live already. Hello. Hi, Mr. Jason Farr. Thank you for participating in tonight's discussion, town hall for the Hamilton East Provincial candidates on systemic racism, hate, poverty, and disability. Of course, it's a very important conversation to have, and I'm really hoping that everybody tuned in tonight is looking forward to to hearing your answers and to really reflect on the importance of these topics and how decisions made by the provincial government have very real impacts on things like systemic racism, things like poverty, disability, and hate. But before we get started, I just wanted to do a very quick land acknowledgement and acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and the Erie and the Neutral. Of course, when we have these land acknowledgements, or when we kind of talk about being on unceded territory, it's of course important to acknowledge and think about the fact and reflect on the fact that these provincial elections happen, municipal elections, federal elections, but what implications do these sorts of decisions have on Indigenous folks, and how have these decisions continued to be informed by colonization, and what can we do to undo that and kind of reflect on the responsibility that we have to each other in community and to Indigenous folks on this land to protect and be stewards of this land as well. So hello, everybody. My name is Kubra Hagar. I am the program's manager at the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be kind of guiding us through this Q&A style discussion. And I'll pass the baton over to Mr. Jason Farr, who can introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about your commitments and kind of your platform pertaining to the topics of systemic racism, hate, poverty, and disability.
Okay, thank you, Kubra. I'll start with checking the audio. Are you good? Can you hear me okay? Thank you for the thumbs up. First and foremost, I appreciate very much this opportunity. I have been very active and engaged, of course, on the campaign, and it's actually refreshing to take a bit of a break. It's been a hot and steamy one walking around Hamilton East Stoney Creek today. The team just went out, and I'll catch up with them after, but certainly I think it's really important for all of the candidates to be part of this town hall, at the very least to show some solidarity on this issue. It should be a nonpartisan issue. It should be a discussion where, it's more of a discussion and less of me sort of preaching policies that we hope to bring forward. I think the best policies as it relates to tonight's very important topic. But part of what we're doing as an Ontario Liberal Party is making certain that it's not something that isn't inclusive, that we welcome to the table those with lived experiences on all the things that we're going to discuss tonight. And I think throughout this town hall, I'll have that opportunity to sort of pepper what we have in the Steve Del Duca Ontario Liberal Party platform, but it all sort of centers around something that could have happened, didn't happen, and if we have the honor of representing Ontario with Stephen Del Duca as the next leader and being the party, certainly it'll begin with a standalone ministry. Standalone ministry that welcomes a minister who is well-versed on the issue of anti-racism, but also knows that it means under that umbrella we educate. Under that umbrella, we acknowledge first and foremost that there's an existence, that there is a problem, that systemic racism exists in all facets. Obviously, not just an issue for provincial institutions, but across the board. Certainly, I have a pretty good knowledge of it and experience as a municipal councillor, and in a city that I think tries, that endeavors, notwithstanding statistics that you're sharing tonight, I'm sure too, as we discuss things further. Where we have still a lot of work to do, but we recognize that, and certainly with a standalone minister, that wants to have those conversations and wants to educate and wants to bring in policies based on those conversations, we're sort of following suit. I know that it's a hard discussion for some to have, but you folks should know that it's not one that is lacking at the doors. I mean, folks that we talk to, folks from different minority groups. The great thing about a campaign is that you have all the time in the world on some porches and outside some apartment doors, and even in Eastgate Square. And you know, a lot of times for me, the first question is, you know, what's bugging you, right? And this comes up. It's not something that is a fringe issue by any stretch of the imagination, and certainly we had reminders of just today in Texas, just how much it is in our face. Buffalo last week and that horrifying issue at Tops, and here at home with the hate crimes and the statistics, albeit I think we report probably better than most communities, and certainly it drives us politically locally, and I know it will drive us provincially to do a better job, and it all starts with recognizing the existence and speaking to the people with lived experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just wanted to acknowledge what you mentioned about, you know, the importance of this being a conversation that happens across the board, you know, a nonpartisan conversation where kind of all the candidates are engaged. And I did want to mention that, you know, it is unfortunate that the other candidates weren't able to join us tonight. They had scheduling conflicts. However, you know, hopefully that this will still be a very fruitful conversation, and I'm hoping that the viewers will still be able to, you know, listen and kind of reflect and benefit from this conversation. So maybe we can dive right into the questions, and the first one being, what do you and or your party believe is necessary in order to combat systemic racism within, you know, the institutional systems? Because you did mention, like, it isn't necessarily, you know, it's a problem that needs to be addressed at the province. Of course, that's like a multi-factor thing that, you know, systemic racism is kind of everywhere and kind of, you know, embedded in the roots. However, what is necessary to combat systemic racism within the institutional systems that are governed by the province, for example, the school system or the healthcare system, hospitals, and things like that?
Yeah, and again, back to, you know, won't dwell on it, but, you know, I think it speaks volumes when you have a party like the Ontario Liberal Party that recognizes that we need a standalone ministry on this, because it is a subject that deserves that, and that presence of that minister, I would hope would be reassuring to a whole lot of people who find this as a very significant issue, this campaign, and you know, it's something that, you know, has never been done before in provincial politics. So again, to focus on educating, to focus on acknowledging the existence first and foremost, and to you know, not come up with policies without having the right people at the table. I know later on you have some questions where we can show where we've done that municipally as it relates to you know, the fair wage policy, or the pilot that we had on OW and ODSP, and you know, I was pretty proud to have Hamilton as one of those pilot cities, and to certainly the work that Tom Cooper did for many years before that. But it all started really with that community conversation, and that's what this is about. That's what this ministry is about. We need to, we feel, improve the process of investigating hate crimes. It doesn't and shouldn't be up to municipalities. I think that a ministry could, since all municipalities are creatures of the province, you know, set some templates that all municipalities follow. If we investigate and do a better job investigating, we and use a template that is used across the board, we can have a much better understanding. And people like you and others, and Sarah and Joe and so many others in this city that have been champions of this cause for a long, long time, would then have more evidence-based, provincial-wide evidence-based data, and that would help in already what has been, I think, for a lot of you, and you'll agree, I'm sure, successful advocacy. So we need to strengthen the ways we respond two hate incidences, two racism incidents in both the schools, in the health sector institutions that you mentioned, and of course with policing. That's something that we've been working on, and as a short term so far, Hamilton Police Service Board member, it's certainly steps have been made. Conversations that began out of conflict are hopefully bringing everyone to the table, or will continue to bring more and more people to the table. And those are the kinds of things that I think the Ontario Liberal Party are going to be promoting under this ministry. We need to, money, it's always money, isn't it? It's certainly something that is a lot easier for the province than it is a municipality to fund programs. And if we are going to trickle down and work off a universal template province-wide, based on that ministry and that minister's work with the community members with the lived experiences, then we have to fund things accordingly. So that means reversing the cuts of the Ford government, and especially those cuts made to the anti-racism programming. I'm sure an insult to many who've devoted a lot of their time, energy, and enthusiasm to not only advocating, getting the word out, but also trying to get action from those words and from those demonstrations and from the many hours of time in to bring this conversation to the state it's at now, which is the forefront, in my opinion. So things like policing, ensuring police training includes de-escalation all across the province, anti-racism, cultural sensitivity. Mental health is a big part of this as well. We need to continue to hire a more diverse population in those institutions, including police, healthcare, at our schools. We should reevaluate the streaming and the EQAO, and also address how streaming can perpetuate anti-Black racism and further segregate our students from these marginalized backgrounds. Parts of our plan, there's more details to come, quite obviously. We only have a short time tonight, but certainly, things like putting more funding. Our plan is to put more funding into, immigration and schooling of new immigrants. And so language barrier funding is massively important, helping to understand more quickly when issues do arise. And certainly we both know that they do arise. And so I think we're heavily focused on that. I've actually had an opportunity just this weekend to talk briefly to our leader, who was gracious enough to come to Hamilton East Stoney Creek about these things. And it's important to him as well in the Greater Toronto area to stay focused on this and to call attention to the fact that the former government, the Conservative government, clearly didn't see the significance of this or see it as important enough to do anything other than, cut back, scale back on it, and maybe wish that it didn't exist, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think the next question, now that I think, the more that I think about it, and of course, I thought about this earlier, all these questions are kind of, simultaneously linked together in a way that I feel can flow easily in understanding your responses as well. But I think this is also a really crucial angle to approach this with or by. So today in Kamloops, BC, hundreds gathered for a memorial marking the 1-year anniversary since discovering the unmarked graves of children whose lives were lost while being forced to attend residential schools in Kamloops. The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation has said about over 4,000 of these children died at residential schools, but that's not the actual total number, because the total number, as we both know, is much higher. What will your party and yourself do to address the structural legacy of Canada's residential school system, and how will you advance reconciliation in Ontario?
Well, that's another one too, Cooper, where you got to keep the conversation alive. And certainly there are so many active and engaged members of both the Indigenous community and so many other Canadians that see this. I mean, it's right up there with the environmental issues, affordability issues, particularly lately. It's not going to go away. Let's not pretend it's going to go away. Let's face up to the historical facts here in this nation. Let's make some demands of that Pope when he does arrive, and make sure that it's not just recognized, but the apologies where appropriate are made. And certainly in terms of our own policies, we want to mandate learning about this painful history in our nation regarding residential schools. And at the same time, I'm always been a glass half full guy. I know it gets pretty heated around that horseshoe sometimes in council. We also have to recognize, the contributions of our Indigenous communities over time, and at the same time, the contributions they're making on this issue. For a lot of our history, we've been hearing this, but again, too many Canadians, and I'm speaking to this because Truth and Reconciliation really is federal, but you have a provincial Liberal Party that is not just in the shadow of those federal policies. I think clearly when you look at the things that we're talking about as an Ontario Liberal Party, we want to be at the forefront. We want to be alongside, and we want to keep feet to the fire, as it were, to use cliches, and I hate using those cliches, but so we'll do things like support the teaching of First Nations languages in classrooms. A lost art form in a lot of ways, but it's still out there. And so reinforce the support of those teachings, investigate and commemorate former residential school sites. There's lots of folks that are involved in this advocacy that would like to see more to that end. Invest in First Nations public libraries, I think, is crucially important. And the interest is there right now from a broader public, absolutely. Make the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation a statutory holiday. Absolutely the best way to remind all Ontarians of the need to never forget, to understand and appreciate that this is not a scenario in the past that any of us should be proud of, but it is also one that we should never forget. And in an annual reconciliation recognition through a holiday is a good way to do that. Bring back and expand Indigenous history, languages, and cultural lessons, including learning about residential schools as well. More and more we have learned about that, particularly in the last few years, but certainly, again, not taking the foot off the gas on this one, because it's crucially important, and it's really a sad part of not only Ontarian but Canadian history, quite obviously. So those are a lot of the things that we'll be doing. But again, this is another file, Kubra, where you've got to engage. You need to stay focused on learning from those who's had those lives as students in these schools, who are survivors, and who know more than any of us the experiences, not only that, but the kinds of things that would make them, maybe just a little bit more comfortable in the fact that we're not just paying attention, we're actually taking some action and doing some things to make sure that recognition is ongoing. I apologize for that.
Yeah, no. Thank you. I guess my next question for you is, specifically about the fact that disabled people have often been left behind in multiple conversations around multiple tables, and this also includes in many decisions made during this pandemic, right? So especially with regard to government support, such as access to accessible, affordable housing, and other social assistance rates and things like that. So in what ways is your party planning to support and uplift disabled people in Ontario?
Comes down to money again. So, we've got the 20%. I'm sure you're aware of this. I'm sure this is something that you and your group have been highly focused on. And certainly, maybe 8 years ago, it didn't resonate. Certainly for a few parties, I'll admit the NDP as well. But I mean, the Ontario Liberal Party, in conjunction with all those other things that we're talking about tonight, are heavily focused on the 20%. So 10% of increased funding for ODSP in our first year, another 10% in the second year, so 20% total, and OW. So getting those rates up at least to where it's something a little more palatable. Certainly we shouldn't stop, in my humble opinion, doing the math. I mean, we're looking right now at an affordability crisis, quite frankly. It's across the world. And it's here in Hamilton East, Stoney Creek as well. I hear that a lot. It's not just the price of food, it's the price of gas, but it's also a big concern for those who are maybe less fortunate than others and who are just getting by. They aren't just in the downtown. They're not just in the urban wards. They are everywhere, and they're just trying to hang on. And for those that are hurting, those who are on the Ontario Disability benefits or trying but not succeeding just yet on rebounding and find themselves on OW, they matter, they count, and that affordability hurts even more because it's already almost swore there. It's already a problem. It was already a problem going in. We know that. I mentioned earlier to you in the opening about the work people like Tom Cooper and many others, Social Research Planning Council, many of the groups here associated with CUBRA over many years had advocated for with respect to the basic income pilot. I have always been, as a councillor, and I will be as an MPP, a strong supporter of living wage, of bringing back that pilot. I was very, very happy, pleased, and advocated to make sure that the platform actually included bringing back the pilot. So increasing, and reintroducing the basic income pilot was a big and important step, I think, for us. And that, of course, is to address those gaps in coverages. Those who don't qualify for ODSP or get denied and need to appeal, we want to help them as well. So I like I said, I was a strong supporter as a councillor. I remain a strong supporter as a human being. And I was very pleased when Hamiltonians were among the cities that got to be part of that pilot. And as you recall, I'm sure, there was all sorts of evidence that it was successful. My first argument on having a plan that looks at basic income as the standard was an economic development argument. I was in General Issues Committee. It was my first term of council, and I talked about how if we gave folks more money, where are they going to spend it? We had this university professor from McMaster, an expert and advocate as well, and he said, "Great question," and I don't get that a lot, but he said, "Great question," because they're going to spend it in your local stores, in your grocery stores, at the restaurants now and again, because they might have a little bit set aside to have that special evening here and there, like the rest of us. And it's going to go right back into the local economy. So it's actually a win. It's a prevailing win overall with respect to where that extra few dollars is spent. It's right there in the neighborhoods where people live. So increasing the amount of income earned as well without impacting assistance from $2,400 to $6,000 is also one of our plans that I wanted to share with you today. So going from that $200 extra dollars you can earn a month to about $500 extra dollars a month, that goes a long way too. I mean, there's a lot of people that I know that are very pleased to hear that, to have that opportunity to establish a little bit more at the end of each month in an effort to, make life a little bit better for themselves and their families. I'm really proud of what the Ontario Liberal Party is doing with respect to paying attention to this issue. And I was glad you had that as part of your question tonight.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And, you mentioned the statistics earlier, and I think, we're getting to that point right now where I kind of want to talk about, anti-racism, hate based on multiple things, based on race, faith, and other parts of people's identities. So, of course, addressing racism and hate is a priority for people who've experienced these attacks. And it is something that happens, myself as a Black Muslim woman, I can tell you that is something that happens quite frequently to members of my community and other communities, who share similar identities or different identities that are also marginalized. Hamilton has been dubbed the hate crime capital of Canada, and we've seen reported hate crimes rise by 38% within 2021. And of course, these are just reported hate crimes. The ones that haven't been reported to police are still unknown. So definitely the number is higher. However, in the wake of recent events in Buffalo, where white supremacists killed 10 Black members of the community, and in London last year, where an Islamophobic terrorist attack took the lives of 3 generations of the Epsal family in London, we see impacted communities calling for action. In the wake of the London attack, the National Council of Canadian Muslims brought forward legislation earlier this year to help address Islamophobia in Ontario. The bill did not pass before the election campaign began, So my question for you is, do you support the legislation, and what would you and your party do to address Islamophobia and hate and all forms of hate and racism, but specifically, Islamophobia and hate in Ontario?
I appreciate this one too. One of the big topics, we've got a few popular planks, and one that came out of the gates early was banning all handguns. And that speaks to, community violence in general, but, we know that, unfortunately, that's a scary thing. And it was a bit controversial for some when Stephen Del Duca mentioned it. But when you hear about his talking points, it's interrelated to what we're speaking about here as well. And particularly when you're mentioning the incidences so close to home at our tops, not so friendly markets in Buffalo, and of course today in Texas, and so many issues prevalent in the States. What happens when you don't take that extra step? Maybe it is a little controversial for those collectors out there, but in reality, the more prevalent handguns are, the more the possibility that these disasters, these terrible tragedies are going to strike. Here at home, though, maybe it wasn't a handgun, but we were reminded of the anniversary pending on the tragedy in London last July. We had shortly thereafter, those who are paying attention and participating today as viewers will remember that there was an alleged Cambridge gentleman in a pickup truck, I think it was, that tried to run down in a Hamilton Home Depot parking lot our downtown mosque, Adman's wife and daughter, as I recall. It was shortly after that unbelievably horrific incident in London that occurred. It was subsequent to that, or somewhere in that ballpark, in that July we'd all like to forget of 2021, that the National Council of Canadian Muslims actually sent out recommendations to all three levels of government. I was a councillor at the time. I read it at around 9 o'clock in the morning, and by 10 o'clock in the morning, I had made a motion to my colleagues at council to approve all of those recommendations. And so I put that motion together, sent it off within an hour and a half. Maybe it didn't happen so quickly with the provincial recommendations or the many federal recommendations that were part of that document that clearly took a lot of time and covered off what I felt the Muslim community saw as the most significant, most important, and most prevalent issues in their community, and all sort of tackling that Islamophobia that really shouldn't in this day and age exist at all. I was supported. It was moved subsequently at the next council meeting, which was mid-August or so, and it moved unanimously. So I was proud to be the author of that particular motion. I was struck by how well put together it was, and almost a cut and paste exercise, Kubra. It was something that wasn't hard for me to do. I knew in my heart of hearts it had to be done, and really wasn't even a debate. And when we think about the things that you continue to call attention to, you and your groups, which you should do, which the things that you advocate for, this is one of them. It's significant, it's important, and it's not something we should shy away from. We should jump right in as elected officials and help. And I think the provincial government is doing the same thing. So while the bill didn't pass because of the election, as you stated, we are an unequivocal yes as an Ontario Liberal Party to pass the Our London Family Act and create new tools and strategies, of course, to combat racism. We want to reverse those forward anti-racism funding cuts and support the programs better than they ever have before. We want to, as I mentioned, I think earlier, better investigate hate crimes and understand, that absolutely is essential, and report these hate crimes, and be sure that where human rights complaints are in order, that they proceed, and again, document and share. And that's the kind of thing that gets you even more broader support for things like this. We want to protect religious institutions as well from violence and intimidation. I've been to the downtown mosque shortly after events have occurred, whether a close drive from Hamilton or elsewhere, and the pain is so real. I'm honored to be called a brother. We've done a lot of work together in the downtown mosque earlier. I've done a little bit of work at the Bosnian Mosque too, which I've spent some time at since returning to my roots here in Hamilton East, Stoney Creek, and it's you know it's heartbreaking, particularly in times of crisis, because yours is a community that really knows how to come together on a regular basis, and so peaceful and so kind and so beautiful. And when crap like this goes on, it's such a distressing, I'd like to think very small element of disturbed individuals who are creating a fear in a group of people who are just the opposite. I mean, just so embracing the Canadian culture and so willing to share their own. And they are brothers to me and sisters and great role models in a lot of ways. And again, another plank, another part of our platform that falls under that umbrella of that standalone ministry, which is something never before done in Ontario, and it's something that's much needed for sure. I know you agree.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And following that, we can probably move on to the last question for tonight. But the last question I think is still going to bring about a lot of very thoughtful answers, because I think it's a topic that comes up quite often. Yes, at the provincial level, but I would say recently at the municipal level as well. In the recent years, the conversation has been becoming more and more prevalent because it's been impacting more and more folks in Hamilton and across the province. But affordability is top of mind for many voters, considering the rising cost of rent and the constant threat of rent eviction. And for those of you viewing who are not familiar with the term, rent eviction refers to when tenants are displaced from their rental units due to any major renovations to the apartment, and then are displaced from affordable housing and forced to relocate in search of another often higher cost housing accommodation. So the rising cost of rent, the constant threat of rent eviction. What will you and your party do to address the rising cost of rent for low-income residents in Hamilton?
Rent control. So we'll bring rent control back. Ford again, unfortunately, created an arbitrary rent control system, one that I think was more to benefit developer friends and so forth than those renting. I don't think the progressive Conservatives understand or are willing to understand how significant an issue this is. I mean, you and I are on a different side of one element of an encampment issue as it stands right now, Kubra, and I'm glad I have this opportunity to tell you live and in person that I don't disrespect that issue as it relates to tents in parks. Let's keep it simple, but that is a growing problem. I am not unaware of it, notwithstanding the impacts and my particular stance on that. That said, I mean, you can point to the disparity emanating in a large part from the inability to keep up with what's happening. And it's not just rent evictions, it's dumb evictions. It's somewhere in between sometimes. It's, that issue where the building is quite clearly should be an affordable building, but because the market will demand 2,000 rather than the 700 or 600 that everyone else is paying just for the sheer fact that they were lucky enough to stay in that apartment, it's a killer. It's it's almost impossible now actually to find affordable rent in the city. So we need to first and foremost control rent, prevent rent hikes by reinstating the rent control everywhere in Ontario. Otherwise, what we're going to see is this crisis that creates things like our encampment issues, but many other issues in and around large and small markets across this province. And so we need to recognize the fact that one of the biggest things we can do is bring back rent control. And at the same time, I think it's important that you understand that the Ontario Liberal Party is also into improving the safety of tenant housing and strengthening enforcement and landlord-tenant dispute resolutions as well, which is a big problem. It seems to be, and you'll agree, one-sided. And so increasing funding in ways we can help and reverse funding cuts to legal aid, something, again, a local initiative where we have, as a municipality, understood, appreciated, and done what we can with those limited municipal dollars, do it in a bigger way as a province, which is something we're going to do. And semi-related, create 22,000 new homes for off-reserve Indigenous peoples and develop a distinct housing strategy for and led by off-reserve Indigenous peoples is also, I think, crucially important. But it is an issue that is not going to go away unless we do something as an Ontario Liberal Party, as an Ontario government, and as hopefully the governing party to address this. It's getting increasingly harder for more and more people, and that is evident more and more every day.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Those are the end of my questions, and I really
Thank you.
appreciate you taking the time to, discuss and have this conversation. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's so important for Hamiltonians and for the residents of Hamilton East Stoney Creek to hear what the candidates in their riding have to say about these really important topics and very impactful topics as well. So thank you for making it out tonight. And just a reminder to folks who are either viewing now or will be viewing this sometime tonight or maybe sometime later in the week, that the election day is June 2nd. Go out and vote. The early voting polls are already open, so if you want to vote that way, you can do so as well. However, election day is June 2nd, so make sure that you go out and vote at your local voting poll, and you should have received your voting card in the mail. So that should give you the address of where the closest voting poll is to your address. So thank you again, Councillor. Sorry, I slipped there. Thank you again, Mr. Farr, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you, Cooper, and thank you everybody for watching. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.